rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the abandoned warehouse like machine gun fire, each drop echoing through the cavernous space with an ominous rhythm that seemed to count down Elena Vasquez's remaining moments. The building reeked of rust, motor oil, and something far more sinister, the metallic tang of old blood that had soaked into the concrete floor over years of the cartel's brutal operations. Flickering fluorescent lights cast sickly shadows across the walls, illuminating graffiti tags and bullet holes that told stories of previous victims who had met their end in this godforsaken place. Elena's knees scraped against the rough concrete as she was shoved forward by two massive enforcers, their hands like iron clamps on her shoulders. Her designer blazer, the one she'd worn to maintain her cover as an investigative journalist, was now torn and stained, her carefully styled hair disheveled from the violent journey that had brought her here. The zip ties around her wrists bit into her skin, tight enough to cut off circulation, exactly as they were meant to. She kept her breathing steady, her face a mask of controlled terror that she'd perfected over years of deep cover operations. "Look what we caught sniffing around our business," called out Rico Mendez, one of the enforcers, his voice carrying a thick accent and barely contained violence. He wore a gold chain thick enough to anchor a boat, and his arms were covered in tattoos that chronicled his rise through the cartel's ranks, each one representing a life he'd taken or a territory he'd claimed. The famous Elena Vasquez, the reporter who thinks she can bring down the Santos organization with her little newspaper articles. The warehouse erupted in cruel laughter from the dozen armed men who had formed a loose circle around her. They ranged in age from teenagers barely old enough to shave to grizzled veterans whose scars told stories of countless turf wars. Each one carried military-grade weapons, AK-47s, AR-15s, and pistols that gleamed under the harsh lights. Their confidence was palpable, the swagger of men who had never met an opponent they couldn't intimidate or eliminate. Miguel Santos emerged from the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. At 45, he was the cartel's lieutenant, a man whose reputation for creative brutality had earned him the nickname El Carnicero, the butcher. His expensive suit was immaculate despite the warehouse's grimy environment, and his cold eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from years of viewing human life as nothing more than a commodity to be traded or discarded. A jagged scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a souvenir from a rival cartel's assassination attempt that had only made him more ruthless. "Miss Vasquez," Santos said, his voice smooth as silk, but carrying an undertone of menace that made several of his own men shift nervously. "Your articles have been quite educational, particularly the one about our shipping routes through the port of Long Beach. That little piece of journalism cost us $12 million in seized merchandise and got 6 of my best men arrested." He circled her slowly, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "I have to admit, your research was impressively thorough, almost like you had inside information." Elena kept her eyes downcast, playing the role of a terrified reporter who had gotten in over her head. "I just follow the facts," she whispered, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine fear. "I never meant to." "To what?" Santos interrupted, his voice rising. "To destroy lives, to ruin families. Do you know what happens to the children of the men you helped put in prison, Miss Vasquez? Do you care about the mothers who now have no one to provide for them?" The irony wasn't lost on Elena. This man, who had built his empire on the suffering of countless families destroyed by drugs, was lecturing her about collateral damage. She'd seen the files on Santos, the teenage girls forced into prostitution, the rival dealers found dismembered in oil drums, the communities terrorized into submission. But she maintained her facade, letting a single tear roll down her cheek. "I think," Santos continued, gesturing grandly to his assembled crew, "that it's time for you to understand the real consequences of your actions. You see that table over there?" He pointed to a rusted metal surface about 50 feet away, where an assault rifle lay waiting like an instrument of execution. "That's a Kalashnikov AK-47, fully automatic 30-round magazine, a weapon of war, you might say." The men around her began to chuckle, sensing where this was heading. Several pulled out their phones, eager to record what they assumed would be either spectacular failure or gruesome entertainment. The warehouse filled with the sound of their anticipation, whispered bets on whether she'd even be able to lift the weapon, crude jokes about her chances of survival. "Here's what's going to happen," Santos announced, his voice carrying over the noise. "You're going to pick up that rifle and you're going to try to hit that target." He gestured to a piece of cardboard with a crude bullseye drawn in red paint, positioned against the far wall. "If you can hit it just once anywhere on the target, I'll let you walk out of here. You can go back to your little newspaper, write whatever stories you want. Hell, I'll even give you an exclusive interview." The laughter grew louder. Elena could hear individual voices now. "She probably thinks the safety is a seatbelt," called out one young enforcer. $20 says she shoots herself in the foot," shouted another. "I got 50 that says she can't even figure out which end the bullets come out of," added a third. Santos raised his hand for silence, and the warehouse fell quiet except for the steady drumming of rain overhead. "But if you miss," he continued, his smile never wavering, "well, let's just say your next article will be written in a very different kind of ink." Elena looked around the circle of faces, each one twisted with anticipation and cruelty. These men had spent their lives believing that violence was the ultimate solution, that fear was the most effective tool of control. They saw her as nothing more than another victim, another example to be made. The irony was almost amusing, if they only knew that they had just handed their own destruction to one of the most lethal operatives in modern intelligence history. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I have a daughter. She's only 8 years old. She needs her mother." It was a lie, of course. Elena Vasquez had no children, no family that could be used as leverage against her, but the fabrication served its purpose, drawing out the cruelty in Santos's smile and making his men even more confident in their superiority. They were predators who fed on weakness, and she was giving them exactly what they expected to see. "Then you'd better not miss," Santos replied coldly. He nodded to Rico, who cut the zip ties with a tactical knife that gleamed wickedly in the fluorescent light. Elena rubbed her wrists, wincing as circulation returned to her hands, playing up the discomfort while secretly testing her grip strength and flexibility. The walk to the table felt like a funeral march. Each step echoed through the warehouse, and Elena could feel the weight of a dozen stairs boring into her back. The rifle lay before her like a sleeping serpent, its black metal surface reflecting the harsh lights above. She had handled this exact model hundreds of times during her CIA training, could field strip and reassemble it blindfolded, knew its capabilities and limitations better than most soldiers who carried it into combat. But to the men watching her, she was just another terrified civilian about to learn the hard way that the real world was far more dangerous than the sanitized version presented in newspapers and television reports. They had no idea that they were watching a predator in sheep's clothing, a hunter who had spent months allowing herself to be herded into this exact position. Elena reached for the rifle with trembling hands, her fingers barely able to wrap around the grip. The weapon felt heavy and unfamiliar in her grasp, or at least, that's what her body language suggested to the eager audience behind her. In reality, the AK-47 felt like an extension of her own body, as natural and comfortable as breathing. "This is going to be good," whispered one of the enforcers, his phone already recording. "Wait until the boys back home see this." Santos checked his expensive watch with theatrical precision. "You have 60 seconds, Miss Vasquez. I suggest you don't waste them." The countdown had begun, but Elena Vasquez, or rather, the woman who had been using that identity for the past 8 months, was exactly where she needed to be. The trap had been set, the players were in position, and the real show was about to begin. The transformation began so subtly that none of the cartel members noticed it at first. Elena's trembling hands steadied as they found their grip on the AK-47, her fingers automatically locating the safety mechanism with the unconscious precision of muscle memory burned into her nervous system through thousands of hours of training. The weapon's weight, which had seemed to overwhelm her moments before, now felt perfectly balanced in her grasp, 37 inches of Soviet engineering that had become an extension of her will. 50 seconds, Santos called out, his voice dripping with mock encouragement. "Remember, just one hit anywhere on the target and you get to see your daughter again." The lie about having a child had served its purpose, but now Elena let it fall away along with the rest of her carefully constructed facade. Her breathing shifted from the rapid, panicked gasps of a terrified civilian to the slow, controlled rhythm of a trained killer preparing for action. She could feel her heart rate dropping, her vision sharpening, as years of conditioning kicked in like a switch being flipped. The first indication that something had changed came when Elena's posture shifted. The hunched, defensive stance of a victim straightened into the confident bearing of someone who had faced death so many times that it had become an old acquaintance. Her shoulders squared, her feet found their proper spacing, and her grip on the rifle adjusted with the kind of precision that only came from extensive combat experience. 40 seconds, Santos announced, but there was something different in his voice now, a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Elena raised the rifle to her shoulder in one fluid motion, the movement so smooth and practiced that it looked like a choreographed dance. The stock settled against her shoulder with perfect alignment, her cheek found its natural position against the wood, and her eye aligned with the iron sights as if guided by an invisible hand. There was no fumbling, no hesitation, no sign of the amateur they had expected to humiliate. Rico Mendez was the first to notice that something was wrong. As one of Santos's most experienced enforcers, he had seen enough combat to recognize the difference between a civilian handling a weapon for the first time and a professional who had been born to kill. "Jefe," he whispered urgently, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "Something's not right about this." But Santos was too caught up in his own performance to listen. 30 seconds, Miss Vasquez. The clock is ticking, and my patience is wearing thin." Elena's finger found the trigger with the delicate touch of a surgeon, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without firing. Through the iron sights, the crude cardboard target seemed to grow larger, every detail becoming crystal clear despite the 50-foot distance. But she wasn't looking at the target anymore. She was calculating angles, distances, and the positions of every armed man in the warehouse. The first shot came without warning. The AK-47 barked once, the muzzle flash illuminating Elena's face for a split second and revealing an expression of cold, professional focus that belonged on a battlefield, not in the trembling features of a terrified journalist. The bullet didn't just hit the target, it punched through the exact center of the bullseye with surgical precision, sending cardboard fragments flying and leaving a hole so perfectly centered that it looked like it had been cut with a compass. The warehouse fell silent, except for the echo of the gunshot and the continued drumming of rain on the metal roof. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed, as their minds struggled to process what they had just witnessed. But Elena wasn't finished. The second shot followed less than a heartbeat after the first, the rifle cycling with mechanical precision as she worked the action with movements too fast for the eye to follow. This bullet struck the exact same hole as the first, widening it by mere millimeters, a feat of marksmanship that would have been impressive at 10 feet, let alone 50. "Dios mío," whispered one of the younger enforcers, his phone trembling in his hands as he tried to keep recording. The third shot came before anyone could react, and this time Elena demonstrated a level of skill that transcended mere marksmanship and entered the realm of the impossible. The bullet split the wooden post holding the target, sending the cardboard spinning through the air. Without missing a beat, she fired a fourth shot that caught the target mid-flight and pinned it to the concrete wall behind it. But the real demonstration was just beginning. Elena spun on her heel with the fluid grace of a dancer, the rifle tracking smoothly as she identified and engaged targets with the kind of speed and precision that belonged in action movies, not reality. Her fifth shot destroyed the pistol in Rico's hand before he could clear leather, the bullet striking the weapon's frame and sending it spinning across the warehouse floor in a shower of sparks and metal fragments. The sixth shot took out the AK-47 held by the enforcer to her left, the bullet striking the receiver and rendering the weapon inoperable without harming the man holding it. The seventh shot disabled another rifle, then another, each bullet placed with such precision that it destroyed the weapons while leaving their wielders unharmed but thoroughly demoralized. "What the hell?" Santos began, but his words were cut off as Elena's rifle swung toward him with the inevitability of death itself. I wouldn't, she said, her voice no longer carrying the trembling fear of a victim, but the cold authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The transformation was so complete that she seemed like an entirely different person, which, in many ways, she was. The men around her were frozen in shock, their weapons either destroyed or forgotten as they tried to comprehend what they were witnessing. Several had dropped to their knees, their hands raised in surrender, while others stood paralyzed by the sudden reversal of power in the warehouse. Santos's face had gone pale, his confident smirk replaced by the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "You're not a journalist," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Oh, but I am," Elena replied, her rifle never wavering from its target. Elena Vasquez, investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Tribune, winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes for my coverage of international organized crime. "But you're right, that's not all I am." She took a step forward, and every man in the warehouse instinctively stepped back. The balance of power had shifted so completely that the dozen armed cartel members now seemed like children cowering before an adult. "Before I became a journalist," Elena continued, her voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that was far more terrifying than any shouted threat, "I spent 12 years with the Central Intelligence Agency, specialized in deep cover operations, infiltration, and what the bureaucrats like to call targeted elimination of high-value assets." Rico Mendez, still nursing his stinging hand from where his pistol had been shot away, found his voice. "La Fantasma," he breathed, the words carrying the weight of legend and nightmare. "You're the ghost." The name rippled through the warehouse like a physical force. La Fantasma, the ghost, was a legend in the criminal underworld, a boogeyman used to frighten new recruits and explain the inexplicable disappearances of cartel leaders across 3 continents. Some said she was a myth, others claimed she was a team of operatives using the same code name. But those who had survived encounters with her knew the truth. She was very real, very deadly, and very much a woman who had turned the art of killing into a science. "Former CIA," Elena corrected, her tone suggesting that the distinction was important. "I retired from government service 3 years ago to pursue a career in journalism. Turns out, the skills translate quite well. Amazing how much access you can get to criminal organizations when they think you're just another reporter looking for a story." Santos was backing away now, his expensive shoes slipping on the oil-stained concrete as he tried to put distance between himself and the woman who had just revealed herself to be one of the most dangerous people on the planet. "This is impossible," he stammered. "We checked you out. We know everything about Elena Vasquez, her background, her education, her career. You know everything about the cover identity I've been building for 8 months," Elena interrupted. "The real Elena Vasquez died in a car accident in Guatemala 2 years ago. I've been wearing her life like a costume, and you've been dancing to my tune since the day I walked into your organization." The implications of her words were staggering. Every meeting, every interview, every seemingly innocent question she had asked over the past months, it had all been part of an elaborate intelligence-gathering operation. The cartel members looked at each other with growing horror as they realized how thoroughly they had been manipulated. "The shipping routes, the financial networks, the safe houses," Elena continued, her rifle still trained on Santos with unwavering precision. "I didn't discover them through investigative journalism. I've been mapping your entire operation from the inside, documenting every crime, recording every conversation, building a case that will put your entire organization away for life." Santos's hand moved toward the pistol at his waist, but Elena's rifle tracked the movement with mechanical precision. "I really wouldn't recommend that, Miguel. You see, I've been counting bullets, and I still have 23 rounds left in this magazine, more than enough to disable every weapon in this room and still have plenty left over for more permanent solutions." The warehouse had become a tableau of frozen terror, with Elena at its center like a spider in her web. The men who had been laughing and joking about her impending execution now found themselves at the mercy of a predator who had been hunting them for months without their knowledge. But Elena wasn't finished with her revelations. The real surprise was yet to come. The silence in the warehouse stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain and the barely audible whimper from one of the younger enforcers who had finally grasped the magnitude of their situation. Elena stood motionless in the center of the concrete floor, the AK-47 held with the casual confidence of someone for whom violence was as natural as breathing. Her eyes swept across the faces of the men surrounding her, cataloging their positions, their weapons, their potential for resistance. "You want to know the really beautiful part of this operation?" Elena asked, her voice carrying a note of professional satisfaction that chilled the blood of everyone listening. Every word of this conversation is being broadcast live to news stations across 3 continents. Santos's face went from pale to ashen. "That's impossible. We swept you for recording devices. We." "You swept Elena Vasquez, the journalist," she interrupted, reaching up with her free hand to touch what appeared to be a simple silver earring. "You didn't think to check for military-grade surveillance equipment integrated into jewelry designed by the CIA's Technical Services Division. This little beauty has been transmitting everything, audio, video, GPS coordinates, to a secure satellite uplink since the moment I walked into this warehouse." The implications hit the cartel members like a physical blow. Rico Mendez stumbled backward, his face a mask of horror as he realized that his threats, his casual discussion of murder, his entire criminal enterprise had just been exposed to the world in real time. "You're lying," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Elena smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than any scream of rage could have been. "CNN is running it as breaking news. The BBC picked it up 12 minutes ago. Univision has been broadcasting it live with Spanish subtitles. By now, half the world has watched Miguel Santos, lieutenant of the Hermanos de Sangre cartel, threaten to murder an American journalist on live television." Santos pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, his expensive manicure clicking against the screen as he frantically searched for news coverage. What he found made his knees buckle. The story was everywhere, trending on social media, dominating news feeds, spreading across the internet like wildfire. Videos of his threats were being shared millions of times, his face plastered across headlines in dozens of languages. "But that's not even the best part," Elena continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone savoring a particularly fine wine. "You see, while you've been busy playing your little intimidation games, federal agents have been using the GPS trackers I planted during my months of investigation to raid every single one of your operations simultaneously." She paused, tilting her head as if listening to something only she could hear. "Let's see, the warehouse in San Pedro where you store the cocaine from Colombia, raided 23 minutes ago. The money laundering operation, disguised as a chain of restaurants in East LA, currently being shut down by the FBI. The safe house in Tijuana where you keep your kidnapping victims, Mexican federal police are kicking down the door as we speak." Each revelation hit the cartel members like a physical blow. These weren't just random raids. This was a coordinated takedown of their entire organization, planned and executed with military precision. Years of careful construction, millions of dollars in infrastructure, hundreds of criminal enterprises, all of it crumbling in real time. "Beauty of modern technology," Elena mused, her rifle never wavering from Santos's center mass, "is that a single person with the right training and equipment can bring down an entire criminal empire. I've been placing tracking devices, copying hard drives, photographing documents, and recording conversations for 8 months. Every crime you've committed, every order you've given, every threat you've made, it's all been documented and transmitted to law enforcement agencies across 2 countries." Santos was frantically making phone calls now, trying to reach his lieutenants, his soldiers, his network of corrupt officials. But each call went straight to voicemail, each contact had gone dark. The organization he had spent decades building was collapsing around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Your contact in the LAPD, Detective Morrison, was arrested an hour ago," Elena informed him helpfully. "Turns out, when you have recordings of him taking bribes and discussing evidence tampering, it's remarkably easy to convince internal affairs to take action. The judge you've been paying off in federal court, She's currently being questioned by the FBI about her offshore bank accounts. Amazing what a forensic accountant can discover when they know exactly where to look. The sound of sirens began to penetrate the warehouse, distant at first, but growing steadily louder. Elena's smile widened as she recognized the distinctive wail of federal law enforcement vehicles. FBI, DEA, ATF, and probably half a dozen other agencies all converging on their location with the coordination that only came from months of careful planning. "They should be here in about 3 minutes, she announced, glancing at a watch that was undoubtedly far more sophisticated than it appeared. "Just enough time for me to explain exactly how thoroughly you've been outplayed." Santos was backing toward the rear of the warehouse now, his eyes darting between Elena and the exits, calculating his chances of escape. But Elena seemed to read his thoughts with supernatural accuracy. "I wouldn't recommend running, Miguel. The building is surrounded by federal agents who have been briefed on your appearance, your habits, and your preferred escape routes. Plus, there's the small matter of the explosive charges I placed on all the exits during my reconnaissance visits over the past month." The color drained from Santos's face completely. "You're bluffing." Elena's expression didn't change, but she reached into her jacket pocket with her free hand and withdrew what appeared to be a simple garage door opener. "Would you like to test that theory? I should mention that the charges are shaped to blow inward, designed to incapacitate rather than kill, but I can't guarantee you'll enjoy the experience." The sirens were much closer now, accompanied by the distinctive sound of heavy vehicles taking positions around the building. Through the grimy windows, the cartel members could see the flashing lights of what appeared to be half the federal law enforcement apparatus of Southern California. "Here's what's going to happen," Elena announced, her voice cutting through the chaos with military authority. "You're all going to place your weapons on the ground and assume the position. Any attempt to resist will be met with appropriate force, and I should mention that my definition of appropriate has been shaped by 12 years of dealing with international terrorists." One by one, the cartel members began to comply, their weapons clattering to the concrete floor as they raised their hands in surrender. The fight had gone out of them completely. They were no longer predators, but prey, caught in a trap that had been months in the making. "You have to understand," Elena continued, her tone almost conversational now, "this was never about bringing down just your organization. You were the proof of concept, the demonstration that a single operative with the right cover identity could infiltrate and destroy an entire criminal network from within. The techniques I've developed here will be used against cartels, terrorist organizations, and criminal enterprises around the world." Santos was on his knees now, his expensive suit stained with oil and concrete dust, his empire crumbling around him in real time. "Who are you really?" he whispered, his voice broken and defeated. Elena considered the question for a moment, her head tilted as if weighing how much truth to reveal. "I told you, I'm Elena Vasquez, investigative journalist, but I'm also Sarah Chen, former CIA operative codename Ghost. I'm Maria Rodriguez, the accountant who's been auditing your financial records for the past 6 months. I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the psychiatrist who's been treating your nephew for his drug addiction and learning all about your family dynamics. I'm whoever I need to be to get the job done." The warehouse doors exploded inward as federal agents stormed the building, their tactical gear and automatic weapons creating a stark contrast to the industrial setting. "FBI, everyone on the ground now." Elena smoothly placed her rifle on the floor and raised her hands, but her posture remained relaxed, confident. "Agent Martinez, DEA," she called out, producing credentials that materialized from somewhere in her jacket. "The situation is secure. All suspects are compliant." The lead FBI agent, a grizzled veteran named Thompson who had been briefed on the operation, approached with his weapon lowered but ready. "Ghost?" he asked quietly. "The one and only," Elena confirmed. "Package delivered as promised. You'll find enough evidence in their phones and computers to put this entire organization away for multiple lifetimes. Plus, the live broadcast should make prosecution remarkably straightforward." As the federal agents began processing the cartel members, Elena walked over to where Santos knelt in defeat. She crouched down beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "You asked me earlier if I cared about the families affected by my actions," she said softly. "Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez, age 16, who died of an overdose from heroin your organization sold outside her high school. Or David Kim, age 12, who was caught in the crossfire when your soldiers shot up a rival dealer's house. Or Carmen Vasquez, yes, the real Elena Vasquez, who was murdered by your associates in Guatemala because she was investigating your money laundering operations." Santos looked up at her with eyes full of defeat and dawning understanding. "I do care about families, Miguel. That's why I spent 8 months of my life destroying yours." As Santos was led away in handcuffs, Elena stood and surveyed the warehouse one final time. The operation had been a complete success. The cartel was finished, their assets seized, their network dismantled. But more importantly, the world had just witnessed a new kind of justice, one that combined the precision of military operations with the transparency of modern journalism. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her editor at the Tribune. "Hell of a story, Elena. When can we expect your first-person account?" Elena smiled as she typed her response. "Already writing it. This one's going to be a bestseller." The rain had stopped, and through the warehouse windows, she could see the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. It was going to be a beautiful day.